Three, then it will. Good. And now we're recording. Awesome.
Yes.
I really appreciate you guys taking the time to do this. What I'm hoping to do is keep it to about an hour. And if it's under that, great. So far, I can tell you right now that we've actually needed to do another session. In fact, Luke, I may talk to you about this later, is in the prop session, everybody agreed we're just going to do a part two. Because we were still we were deep in conversation about stuff. And we went to, it was about an hour 15. And I'm like, you know, students will be able to hold that attention for a little while, but maybe if we break it into episodes. So what I'd like to do is just, I'm going to start by introducing you. And then if you guys could just one at a time, just who you are, where you work, and what kind of your basic responsibility of what you do. So James, I've talked to my students about you where I've said that you have worked as like a production manager, but you also work as a producer at Juilliard. And so just kind of giving a general idea of what that entails, because as long as you didn't sign NDA or whatever, but I'm just kidding. But anything like that. So I do appreciate you.
Trying to figure it out.
Yeah. I do appreciate you guys doing this. We have Jeff Giebert. He is I guess a freelance, right, based out of New York, local one. And then we've got James Gregg, who works in the drama division at Juilliard, and Luke Johnson, who is a lighting designer and production manager at Raleigh Memorial Auditorium. Jeff, if you don't mind, go ahead and start.
Sure. I've spent a lot of years working in New York and currently work on Broadway doing different shows, load-ins, and different facets of production, whether it's props or carpentry or rigging.
Awesome. Thank you. James, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm at my 20th year at the Juilliard School. I started as in directing. I received my MFA at Florida State. Kind of got called up to New York. Have kind of been there ever since. My job has kind of ebbed and bowed throughout the years. There are times that I'm a production manager responsible for a single show, but it's evolved more towards a production activities manager, where it's more of the full scope of the season and caretaking and shepherding multiple shows at once, usually about 7 to 9. So it's more of a producer's eye about how that is ultimately brought to stage. But yeah, thank you.
I'm Luke Johnson. I'm the production manager for Duke Energy Center for the Performing Arts. So we have 4 venues in our complex. I used to be a touring production manager for some regional theaters, but I've been in my position now for about 6 years. I went to school at North Carolina School of the Arts for lighting design, and I did that for a while, but now about the last 8 or 9 years, I've been mostly production managing. So get to see a little bit of everything.
And Jeff, you went to what, junior college, and then you went to Webster, isn't it right?
I went to Webster University. I started at the University of Kansas and studied architecture. After that, I was only there for about a year and a half and decided I didn't like it. So I started kind of exploring different classes in different curriculums. Found a theater class that was just an introduction to theater, and was kind of picked out by the TD at the school to come and help him in the shop. And it just kind of went from there. And when I kind of exhausted all the resources there, he asked me where I wanted to go to school, and I said, I don't know. Why don't you choose Webster University? I'll write you a letter of recommendation. I said, okay, that sounds good. I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. But I am thankful for the encouragement that he gave me, because it turned out to be wonderful. So
interesting. So that would lead me into probably the first question there is, for all 3 of you, is what's the best advice for someone? Because again, this whole thing is kind of like bridging that gap from high school into the professional world. But what would be your advice to someone that wants to do tech theater as a possible career? Jeff, I guess we can start with you since your mic is unmuted.
Okay. Well, my first suggestion is take all the, like, if you're trying to look for a curriculum, study all the facets and expose yourself to everything that's out there, because you might think you know what you want to do, but you might not really. And you may find by studying different aspects that you really like making costumes. You might have started out wanting to build scenery and you say, wow, this fabric is really cool. I love how this works. So you really don't know. You might decide you like designing sets or lighting or sound. So I would say explore every avenue. And if you're going to really want to make a choice of doing it, you should explore the idea of getting some professional experience, whether it's volunteering or, call up if there's a local union that has road shows going on in your area. Go in and call them and ask them if you can be on the crew for a load-in. I mean, you're going to learn more in an 8-hour day than you probably would in 2 years of high school theater, because you're just going to be like, everything's going to be going by so fast. You're going to have to try and pick up and learn as quickly as possible. You're going to see how people react and work together. You'll get an experience that's going to be unique, and it's never the same. So I'd say dive in. But
That's an interesting thought. Interesting way to put it. Yeah, I think it's funny that with my advanced tech, I'm like, we don't do a lot of like textbook. This is what you do. We get right to the build, and then as problems come up, we can solve it as we go. They get the basics in the level 1, so they learn how to use power tools and they learn basic lighting and basic sound. But then it's actually applying it. That's a good point. James, do you have anything to add on it?
I can only speak about my own road, which was I've always felt this to be a calling. The more I tried not to do it, is the more I was doing it. After undergrad, I traveled a lot, and I ended up directing some shows, and it was just something I could never not do, if that makes any sense. And that's when I sat back one day and was like, then let's just go, let's do it. But to Jeff's point, that is so wise, because it's the informed decision that really lays the foundation for a life, a career, and getting out there and testing, trying stuff out, exposing yourself to different facets is so rewarding. I'd have to say, there's also the idea of transferable skills, that the more that it gives you many roads to travel, and as each year progresses, those roads kind of converge into either 2 or 3. But transferable skills is a very important aspect, because as one journey might pay the bills in half a year, another road might pay the bills in the other half. Just something to think about.
Luke, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, kind of continuing like Jeff said, I think it's great to try and expose yourself to as many different facets of this industry as possible, for a lot of reasons. This is a really collaborative form of art. So the more you know about costumes as a lighting designer, the more you know about set design, the more you know about sound design, the better you can do your job, and the better you can communicate with all of those other departments and designers when you're in the theater trying to put a show together as a team. And it's really important that you make the best use of your time when you're in the space, and you're not wasting time trying to have conversations. So I think it's great to know as much as you can about the other disciplines, even if you don't have an interest in doing it yourself, just so that you're educated and can speak intelligently to your peers. And then also, trying to work in as many different environments, as many different types of events as possible, because everything's different. Every companies different. Working for 2 regional theaters, they're going to do things differently. They're going to have different expectations for the same position. Even on Broadway, you can go from one local one house to the next and have different expectations for what is relatively the same position. So it's always good to expose yourself to as many different ways of doing something as possible, I think.
So expanding on on basically the theme of what the three of you said is basically just trying it all and finding where you kind of your niche, if you will, if you fit. Jeff, what's been like the highlight? What do you have one highlight of your career?
Oh, I wouldn't say there's just one. I mean,
It's hard.
there's been so many projects that I've worked on, and so many different avenues of the scenery aspect. I mean, I worked, of course, at Juilliard with James and you, and that's how I got my start. So at Juilliard, there was like some great accomplishments that I've had, and they were more like personal accomplishments because I've kind of reached a milestone where I started to understand things a little more broadly. I didn't have such a narrow aspect of how things worked. And then when I left Juilliard and started working at Hudson Scenic, I was exposed to a whole new way and method of building things, you know, and that place was enormous. So the amount of people, like there were 125 people working on the floor at any given day. In the scenery, you might have like 4 or 5 different Broadway shows being built at the same time. So, you know, you'll be in a room where you're trying to figure out in how to control not just your project, but to work around other people. You know, that was a whole new set of skills. And then when you leave, I left there and I went to the CBS shop, and the CBS shop was a small shop. It only had 6 guys. The 6 of us were really kind of the guts to that shop, and it became a more of a widespread of skills that had to be used. You know, I ran the metal shop. I also drafted up all the things I had to do. I was running the CNC router, and then I was jumping in with carpentry whenever there wasn't something going on in the metal shop or that needed to be drafted. So, you know, that part was like another achievement in understanding what my role could be.
So let me cut in real quick, is because I know this would be a question for my students, is when you talk about the CNC router and that type of stuff, and you had to do almost like a cross whatever I'm trying to say, shop thing, going from carpentry, welding, and all that stuff.
Sure.
Did you sit down with a manual and learn how to use that stuff? Did you learn it in college, or were you trained on it?
There was a little bit of both. So I learned some basics in college when it came to metalworking, but then like machining and milling and sheet metal work was all learned from. Hey, it was all learned from doing.
This JJ, my son getting an ice cream.
Ah, nice. But you know, like the CNC router, I had no experience with doing any of that work. That was completely learned on the job, and I was trained through work to do that work. So you kind of have to be open and willing to learn. I think that's probably the greatest thing I've learned this whole time is, like, if you're not willing to learn anything new and you think you know how to do everything, you're going to be out of a job faster than you know, because there's always going to be someone who knows more than you. There's always going to be someone who's better than you. And there's always going to be someone who's willing to learn the new things. You're going to get lost in the mix if you don't want to try and keep educating yourself. So, you know,
I love that you bring that up, because Luke brought up something very similar in our session with the lighting and sound. Very, very similar to what you just said. Yeah, I mean, I agree, because I always push. For me, it's attitude, a willingness to learn something, and not trying to come into it saying that, you know, oh, Caroline wants to say hey to you guys.
Hi again.
Hey.
Hey, you.
Hi. What's happening?
hello.
Hi. Yay, lovely people.
You've now been in 2 of my recordings. This is great.
Talking shop.
Yeah, hey, you got to say hey.
Literally
I
and
love it.
figuratively. Yeah.
So going back to the conversation is, I tell my students that, or what Luke and I were talking about in the earlier session, is that if you have an openness to learn, not thinking you already know everything about it. I mean, there's so many stories we could talk about from the New York Times, and Luke and I can talk just from local stuff. And if you come into it thinking, I already know all this stuff, number one, you're going to close yourself off to learning something new. And then on top of that, I feel like people are not necessarily going to want to work with you. So you're not going to learn anything new because you're not working with anyone else, because you're alienating yourself from somebody else.
Yeah.
From someone else. But James, do you have a favorite project that you worked on?
Yeah, if I could, I wanted to take a small step back just to follow up on the last question. The importance of exposure to other disciplines that Luke had brought up is so important because it gives you that language. It lets you speak in the way they speak and how they speak. And I learned that in my first year in directing, that if you just talk, actors won't know what you're talking about. But it translates so keenly with how a designer, how you bridge that gap with the designer, how you speak to the shop, how that is so important and essential, because you can be spinning your wheels or misdirect very easily. And then that might be a build that then needs to go away. It's also about process and what's their process. Each of the disciplines has a process that is important and must be respected. And for that knowledge of what happens there in any design aspect in building a show, it's almost critical. So if that might not be your road, it is still imperative that it will contribute to whatever road you choose. But that being said, my favorite project, I actually have two. One is something we call the show that shall not be named at the yard. It was tagged to be brought on tour at the centennial year. It was quite an endeavor, but it was one of our first musicals that we did at the school. And it really kind of brought all aspects from the musicians, I think it was a 17-piece orchestra, to the full cast, and some real heavyweight playwright and director that was just a pleasure to work with. But it was hard. We call it the show that shall not be named, is because it was a hard show on every aspect. It challenged everyone in the build. It challenged everyone in the sound. It challenged everyone maxed out, maybe not in a good way, quite honestly, in fulfilling that vision. But I have to say, my wife, it is one of her favorite shows because she was like, you just never knew what was going to happen next. And beyond that, a smaller rewarding process happened this year. When I first started Juilliard, one of the things that inspired me was process, and the kids doing their own work outside of the matriculation of the school, things that spoke to them in their heart, and we called them the student-initiated projects. And every year we would generate maybe 2, maybe 3, depending, sometimes 5, sometimes 1. But these were shows that really put it on the student to learn his craft and like be exposed to, oh, that's what it takes to do a show. And it was an awakening. And we've done about 83 of them, at the school in my time there. But this year, the artistic director put it into the curriculum. So the second show of the third year now is a student-initiated project slot. And she's like, James, what do you need? I'm like, I want $2 and nothing. And we'll see what we do. Because the challenge is, how do you make art from nothing? And just knowing that process where it's your vision may say, I need this. Your budget may say you can get that. But realistically, when all is said and done, how are you going to make your vision happen? And challenging them in different ways, inspiring them in different ways to see that a box could be seen in 12 different ways, not necessarily a cube, means something. And quite honestly, the idea that the audience is always there with you. You know, don't discount the audience's imagination. Yeah. All I got.
It was awesome. Lou, do you have anything to add?
Well, I talked earlier about, a couple of the shows that I really liked. So I would maybe come at it a different way. One of the things I appreciate, or the shows I appreciate the most, are sometimes the really difficult ones where you have to kind of dig deep or learn something new, or really put outside your depth a little bit and forced to grow. So those are the ones that oftentimes, looking back on it, sometimes not in the moment do you feel that way, but looking back on it, those are the ones that you can say you really got a lot out of and grew as an artist, or as a person, or as a technician, or just in your craft in some way, shape, or form.
It's an interesting thing to bring up, because I just in thinking quickly about that in my own career, is the ones, there are some shows that I just felt like they just kicked my beep, but I look back and I'm like, God, I learned a lot from it. And in some cases it was the way I did it, or it was the interactions, or something like that. It's interesting, because sometimes those hardest ones are the ones that are the most lucrative in knowledge, if you will.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's about the people that you're going through that with. You have to be able to learn something in any situation you're in, and from any group of people you're with. And there's so many talented and creative people in our industry that it's important to try and always take something away from that, I think. And I guess, just in case my wife ever sees this, I should say my favorite show is the one we met on. So
keep it political. So I'm reading over, I just found a list of questions that I did not send to you guys. And this is from one of he's a junior. He's one of my top Scenic guys. And he had a good question here that I thought was interesting. Let me see if I can read it quick. Talking about you guys all having had to lead crews. So he was saying, what are some good tips for amateur crew leads, and how do you recommend leading a large team of very inexperienced workers? It's kind of a loaded question, but do you guys have any advice as far as leading a crew, and especially leading a crew that you may have a variety of skill level? Jeff, do you want to start?
I think first and foremost, you have to be able to kind of have a knowledge of who you have working for you. What you need to know, what types of people they are, what they respond to, how well they work with each other, what their skill levels are, because you might have someone who's very good, but they don't work well with anybody. So you have to be able to find a project that they can go off and do something by themselves, that they're going to actually get something that you really need done, because you know they can get it done. You also need to be able to delegate responsibility out. Know who your leaders are in your group. If you have a crew of like 5 people, you're going to have to be the leader. If you've got a crew of 40 people, you got to find, 5 guys who can each take a group of people and take on a project. So being able to understand who's got the most experience, who's got the most knowledge, and who's got the leadership skills to help you delegate and take control of the situation is really important. You need to be able to back them up with whatever they need to be done. Make sure you can supply them with whatever they need. You know, your crew is only going to be as good as the tools that you can provide them with. And so if you're asking someone to build something and all you have is a handsaw and a Yankee screwdriver, you're probably not going to get a very good quality piece built or, you know, or repaired. If you have a couple of other options for tools that are power tools and they know how to use them, it makes their job easier. And the other thing to remember is that materials are always going to be cheaper than labor. So if you've got a project that requires someone to sit there and try to make something out of something you have, and it's going to take them like 8 hours to get it done, where you could just go out and buy something and have it brought over, and you can get that taken care of in the same 8 hours, but it didn't cost you but maybe 2 hours worth of labor time, that's a huge savings. So when you recognize those types of situations, you can kind of capitalize on that. And it helps everybody because you don't have someone spinning their wheels and getting frustrated and trying to figure out how to do something if they really could have just had it taken care of for themselves in the first place.
So I'm going to piggyback on something you said that made me think of a follow-up question on that is, in our at the high school, we have kids that are going to come in that are coming right from Tech 1. My juniors and seniors have been working for the past couple of years in my advanced tech, and they've got it down, but they become my crew leads. And now they're getting people that come in that they don't know from anywhere, and we start build usually within the first week. And so the only way I'm trying to compare it to what you go through, Jeff, or Luke, I guess in a certain point too, is you're going to get crew people that come in freelance wise. You've never met them before, you know, and you may have read the resume or whatever. But so how do you deal with someone like that, or how do you bring them into your crew? Do you think?
Well, you start with something relatively simple.
Yeah.
And you can, it's really easy to assess. You can tell if someone's yanking your chain and not telling you the truth about their skill level because it'll show right away. On the flip side of that, there are some people who are so modest that you watch them work and you're like, wow, this person's really good. And they'll sit there and be like, oh, I'm not sure if I know how to do that. It's just, they don't have a confidence level yet. And that's where you can kind of, you've assessed what they can do, and then you kind of give them something a little more challenging and kind of ease them into it, because no one's going to take someone who's brand new and give them the hardest project.
Right.
And if one of your students goes out into the workforce, they're not going to get the hard projects. They're going to get the remedial tasks. You know, if I hired one of your students tomorrow to come and work for me, they're probably going to do, like, they're going to sweep the floor.
Right.
They're going to help someone cut lumber. You know, they're going to be the helper. They're not going to be the star on the floor building everything. And it doesn't matter who you are or how old you are. You could be 40 years old and come work for me, and it's still going to be the same process, because everyone has to kind of go through that and learn. And it's not just a learning curve for the employee. It's also it's a learning curve for the employer, because you have to be able to sit back and say, wow, either this guy's really good, let's call him back for tomorrow, or he was okay, we'll put him on the list. And when we need someone that kind of suits his skill set, then we can call him back for these things. But that's going to be typical.
Yeah. That's some good comments. Yeah, I think you pretty well answered it, because the way I try to structure the class is that it's very much like what you're talking about, is when they come in, they may know how to use the basic power tools and do basic construction techniques. But I do tell my crew leads, I'm like, don't give them a step unit to build right away, because they don't know how to build a step unit. You know, they haven't learned enough about carpentry to know that particular type of math, where, you know, if you have them build a 4x8 flat, they should be able to do that. You just keep an eye on them, because, you know, we're still at the level where it's flushness and things like that, you know.
Well, Tim, I've encountered guys who don't even know how to use a table saw.
Yeah.
And it's a shop. I would expect that they knew how to do this, but they say, hey, listen, I'm not really comfortable doing this. I've never used one of these. How do I do it? So then you just take a step back and you reassess where they're at.
Well, and you also bring up a good point there too, is if you don't know how to use certain things, then ask. Or
definitely.
Or if you don't know how to do certain things, I mean, it could be anything from what James does, what Luke does. I mean, if you don't know, ask. Because
Yeah, I
you
always
get
have a
more.
lot more respect for the hand that's going to come in and be honest and say, look, I don't know how to do this. I'm willing to teach anyone anything I know. And so if you can tell me in what your situation is, and this isn't really, addressing the root question you had, but if you can be honest with yourself and with your employers and the people you're working with, most people are willing to teach you. I find. I mean, there's some that are very protective of their knowledge, but most people are willing to help you and teach you, and because it is, it's a team effort for everything we do in theater. So, it's in the end, it's most people I think realize that they're only going to make their lives easier if we can all work productively together.
And so Luke, to piggyback on something you said there, because I was working Bob Seger and they put me on carpentry and I was used to doing lighting and sound on the rock and roll shows, and he wanted me working with a chain motor, right, with the tail and vehicle and bring it up and down. I'm like, dude, I've never used one of these before, And the guy was really cool about it, and because he was kind of a grouch to a bunch of people, but he was like, I just appreciate the fact that you asked. So how do you feel when a stagehand comes to you and asks that question? Do you have the feeling of annoyance? Do you have a feeling of, oh gosh, maybe we should think twice before hiring this guy? Or do you just not care and you're like, good, he asked, let's show him the right way to go?
I mean, in the end, I want to say that I'm always happy that they asked, but sometimes you'll be in the moment and you'll be in a situation and you just really need something done right there, and that's the time where you try not to be rude to anybody, but you say, hey, maybe right now is not the best time for you to learn it, but I'd love to show you some other time. Come back and we can work on this. But in the end, for me, in my position, I'm always happier if someone's going to ask, in part because I want them to grow and develop as a person, but in part because I don't want to put them into a situation that they don't feel comfortable or safe, where they could potentially hurt someone or themselves, or be a detriment to the process in any way.
And Tim, just to interject, I think that goes back to the whole thing of like knowing your audience. If you can recognize the situation that you're in and understand how quickly something needs to happen, you should be able to pick up on the fact of saying, oh, maybe now is not the best time to ask them how to do this. I should just tell them, maybe you're better off having someone else do it. It's no one's going to look at you in the workforce and be like, oh, this guy's a bum. Shows up and doesn't know how to do anything. They're going to look at you that way if you show up and you try to be a know-it-all and know how to do everything and then fail. And there's no real room for failure. What I know, everybody jokes and says like what we do is not rocket science, and in the end of the day, we're not saving lives and we're not doing these kinds of crucial things. But the truth is you kind of are, because you could be doing something on the floor and have no idea that this could end up being a risk to someone else down the road. I mean, it could be as simple as doing something incorrectly, and it could be something that hangs over someone's head that you've rigged, or it could be something that was left on the floor and someone could trip on it. You just have to be kind of cognizant of those things. So, if you know if you can read the situation and be able to realize like no one's disrespecting you by not giving you this answer right now. They just might not have the time to explain it, or they might need something done right this second. You can always learn. You just might not learn that one time.
Bringing it back to different aspects of running a crew, I just kind of go holistically more with respecting their time, their energy, and respecting breaks, and being honest and bringing clarity. What honestly has to happen, what's the methodology, and respect. Because part of, in my experience with the crew was on tour, and I knew no one. It was, in LA or Chicago, they're being brought in, all strangers. And the one thing you kind of need to bring everyone together really quick and trust. And they have to believe in what you're saying, what needs to happen. And they also need to feel that they're being taken care of. And that's where the respect comes in. And once you start bending those rules of breaks or about time or allowing something, then, a small collapse can happen. Yeah.
Interesting. That was a good conversation.
Good information. Just one thing to add to that, Tim.
Yeah.
What James is talking about, respecting people. It also, a good way to show your respect for people that work for you is to take credit, like give them credit when things go right. And when things don't go right, you take the blame for what didn't happen right, because it doesn't do anyone a good to throw someone under the bus.
Right.
All it does is it makes you look like a person that people don't really want to work with.
Yeah.
And it makes everybody else feel like crap because they get mad and don't have any respect for you anymore because you just sat there and threw them under the bus. If you take care of people that work for you, they take care of you.
We talk about that in class a lot too, because every once in a while, it doesn't happen too often, but every once in a while I get some people that butt heads. I mean, it's natural anywhere you are, really. And one of the things that we talk about, I'm losing my train of thought, so I'm gonna try to stay with it, is the respect part. And you touched on it. Now I'm just gone. Crud. It's jumping in there with them. Where a lot of times, like in the professional world, you may not be in a job where you can literally jump in there. But Luke, I've been on shows with you where you come out on stage and you'll either guide people or you'll jump in with them to a certain extent, and I tell my crew leads, I'm like, if you're just standing above them saying, do this, 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 and pointing and saying, nope, you're doing it wrong, do it this way, without getting in there and saying, all right, look, if you do it this way and you put these two joints together, you got the rail on the outside, style on the inside, and then you put them together, whatever the case is, there's going to be a lot. It's like what James was saying, the trust, and they're going to respect you a lot more, and the fact that you're actually diving in there with them. I do love that you bring up the whole don't throw them under the bus thing. Because that is at this age level, that is something that's going to come up because they don't want to get in trouble. And I'm all about just take ownership, man. Just own it. I mean, for me, this is a totally other topic. But when it comes to making a decision, if you're a crew lead and you make the decision, it's sometimes going to be the wrong decision. Just own it and then correct it, right? You bring it back. But if you make a decision and you say, well, Jeff didn't do what I wanted him to do. Well, now you're throwing your people under the bus, man. It was your call. So just own it and then walk it back. Because I don't know. I guess you guys probably know better than I would, but or Luke maybe it is. If you're willing to, as a crew lead, correct your decision and own up to that own mistake, you're not going to be as upset about it as a boss. You'll be like, well, make sure you work it out next time.
No, and the problem gets solved quicker too if everyone's honest about what happened.
Right.
If you're wasting your time bickering over who did what and why and how, and you're just wasting everyone's time. And time in the theater is very expensive because it's not, in the end, it's not just your time. It's everyone on stage's time. And it's the cost to rent the venue, and it's the cost to rent the equipment and everything else. So if time... People, I think, in this industry hate wasting time, especially time in the theater, because it's so expensive. So when you waste it over trivial and childish things like that, that's just really detrimental to the morale, to everything. I mean, you're never gonna. No one's gonna want to work with you if that's how it is. And this, like we talked about, I think before, this is a really small industry, and you can only burn so many bridges. Why do you want to? But you can only burn so many before you don't have anywhere else to go and work.
Right.
That's a good point. I want to go back to something that. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and I think that Luke and James would agree with me that if you're a crew head and you're in a position where you have to make a decision on how to handle something and you're not really sure what to do, none of us would be upset with you if you came and discussed it with us first.
Yeah.
We're not expecting you to take on that responsibility and make a decision. I mean, if it's something as simple as like, are we going to frame this on 2-foot centers or can we cheat it? You're building something in the theater real quick, I don't care. But if you're like, hey, I'm not really sure how to do this, I don't want to make the call, what do you think? I'll have more respect for you that you came and asked first instead of just doing something you were unsure about, because it tells me that you have a respect for everybody else. And for the safe. I hate to drive the point home, but safety is the ultimate key. No one wants anyone to get hurt at work. And I would rather you ask a question and we do it right than not ask the question and someone gets hurt or something,
Yeah, that's a good point. That brings up.
And it doesn't make you less of a leader to ask a question.
That's right.
Exactly.
There's, especially on tour, if I'm touring with a show, I don't know the venue I'm going into as well as the people, the stagehands that work there every day of their lives.
Yeah.
So, when I was on tour, I spent so much of my time asking the people that were there, what's the best way? You guys do this cable run 100 times a year. How would you do it? And there's nothing wrong with that. And it doesn't make you less of a person or less of a leader to ask that.
Because the honest answer is every theater is quirky.
Yeah.
And no theater, we would all like them to all be the same, but they're not. And, especially on tour, you're faced with, an eclectic array of unknowns. That's a really great point. Yeah.
So I want to get, I've got about 15 minutes left. Like I told you guys before, I try to make this about an hour. James, you have to go at 3:30. Is that right? You had a meeting?
I do.
Okay. When you have to, you can stop. And I appreciate you. Like I did with the last crowd, I may ask you guys again, thumbs up, thumbs down, if you guys don't mind doing maybe a part 2, because I do have there's a lot of stuff on my other computer here of questions, and I feel like we could get into a lot of other things. And so I know that with props crowd, we're going to do another part 2 later on this week or sometime next week. And if you're okay with it, we'll do that again, this crew. And then, so for right now, we can keep going. And then after about an hour, I don't want to keep you guys too long, and then we'll wrap it up. But James, you brought up something that there's a question that one of my students sent in. You brought up having a passion for what you do. So I'm just going to read the question as he wrote it, and then would you recommend going into a tech theater career if you were unsure of what you wanted to do as a career but have a passion for tech? That'd be a question starting with you, but then for the rest of you as well.
I think it leads back to the first question that we tackled, which is exposure, and really getting to know all aspects and where you're then guided. Look, the honest answer is theater is a tough field. It just is. Depending on what aspect of theater, I go back to transferable skills, where to make a living, you want to be well-versed in either, maybe in a couple areas, but it's a tough field, and you really have to come to terms with that. It's also, the hours are tough. Tech is at night, wife and kids, you're working nights. Are you okay with that? The money, there's all these questions that you have to ask about, when it comes to a career. Passion alone, doesn't pay the bills. But if you're passionate, one could always say you can find a way, but we also don't live in a fantasy land. It's know what you're getting into. Knowledge is empowering. Beyond that, get to know people. It's network, network, and network. Are you interested in touring? Are you interested in festivals? Are you interested in university? Are you interested in Broadway or production management that goes into off Broadway? Are you interested in lower Lort theaters? These are questions to ask yourself and have a very honest conversation with yourself about.
Yeah.
And the honesty that you can bring to yourself, because you can speak with people to get insight, but everyone's road is different, and there's not one true and tried kind of way in which a career is built. A lot of us kind of journey down, do some employment, some work, which leads to another, which leads to another, which leads to something that you didn't think you would enjoy, and it branches off, and then you're doing that, and you look back, it's 15 years later, and you've enjoyed or had an incredible history. So it's a tough question for me to ask, or to answer, and to constantly ask myself about where I'm at, where am I going, not to stop, not to stop asking those questions, because as you grow, and as your life changes, when you're stepping from high school to college, from college to out into the world, those are significant thresholds, and then there's the relationships, marriage, and then it's all the life questions that impact a career in theater. So it's more knowledge you have, the better. But I kind of give it off to Jeff or Luke to help expand on this one.
Jeff, you got more on there?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I personally, I look at it from this point of view. I work with people every day and we have a blast and we love what we do. And my dad told me when I was a kid, he said, if you find someone you really enjoy doing, it's not work anymore.
Yeah.
Because you love it. But I can look at people in any industry, and there are going to be people who hate what they do. So, if you love doing theater, it makes it easier to enjoy, and it makes it easier to, I got to tell you, I did jobs where I made like $200 a week doing summer stock. And those same jobs might still pay only $200 a week. I have no idea, because it's been 20 years. But I got through it, and I loved it. And it's, for me, every time I went on and did another project, it led to another thing, and another thing, and another group of people. And like James said, the contacts that you make, network. You have to use those people that you've worked with. And I don't mean use them and take advantage of them, but I mean use them to help guide you through wherever you want to go. There's been numerous people that I've worked with in the past who I wish I would have, I wish that I would have had better relationships with, because there was so much more that I could have learned from them. But sometimes jobs are limited, and you don't get to learn from them as much as you want to. But guess what? It's a small world, and you might work with them again. So it's very possible that these people that you've worked with in the past are going to be the next people you work with again. And as a side note, going back to that whole crew leadership thing, people that work for you today might be your boss tomorrow. You never know. So always treat them with respect, because guess what? Everything comes around.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Luke, do you have anything to add to that?
I think for me, I have been very, very fortunate to work with some great people who I have learned a lot from and grown a lot as a person and as an artist and all that. But yeah, so I have never, like I think I told you in the last one, I don't think I've, other than my current job, which I had to for technicality's sake, basically, apply for. I've never had to apply for a job. I've never really struggled to find work. And I think it all goes back to what we've talked about a lot in this whole meeting is networking and trying to present the best version of yourself, an honest version of yourself, and that'll get you the work. If you like it and you're passionate and you work hard, with some modicum of talent, you should be able to find work, I think, in this industry. So is it worth it? For me, yes. I certainly couldn't answer that for anyone else. I know that at the end of every theater job I've ever had, I haven't gone and looked for another career. I've continued to come back to it over, and I think I will, but I think part of it is continuing to find the things in this industry that you like and that do bring out that passion in you. For me, it's a problem solving. I love the problem solving aspect of what we do, and that's no matter what it is. Maybe it's not a technical issue today, maybe it's a personnel issue, and how do I get these people to work together? But I always try and find my passion in whatever I'm doing, and it's easy for me to find that in theater, which is why I like theater. I can always find some puzzle to work out or some problem to solve, and that's what gets me through the tough days, because there will be plenty of them. But in the end, that's the part I like.
You all have mentioned it in some ways is being fortunate. And then, James, you said something, I can't remember now exactly what it was, but I feel like with my own career, I've been unbelievably fortunate to be able to do what I do. And every time James, you said something along the lines of every time you glance at something else, you got pulled deeper in. You got pulled deeper into this, and that I completely agree with that. Not that it's happened many times. Certainly not when I lived in New York. But when we left, I mean, we had circumstances that we had a kid at that point, and you've got circumstances where you have to decide: do I want to go and have the insurance and at least a stable job, or do I want to stay with what I love to do? And for that couple of months that we left New York and I was doing something just for the insurance, I got pulled right back into teaching tech. And now I'm at a point now where I don't see myself leaving this anytime soon, because I just love to teach. I love teaching, and I'm able to stay in the professional world to be able to basically, hopefully get my students excited about what we do, because I love what we do. Our business is awesome. But at the same time, it's going to kick your rear end quick if you're not careful. Because people that moved to New York for like a month and say they went and tried it, and I'm like, they didn't. Go for a little bit longer, or people that really try to get into this business for longer than a couple of months. I'm like, I lived out of my Honda Civic for, I think a full year. I was doing the freelance jobs, Goodspeed Opera House and wherever, and whoever would hire me, I'd pack it all up in my Honda Civic and drive to it. I didn't have a house. I was just going to gig. But
you bring up a great point about knowingly taking on what it means to create a career. In other words, you've got to come to terms with yourself that for the first 5 years, you might be doing PA work. You might be doing be on freelance calls into different shops. You might be doing real hard jobs, but consistent jobs that, as Jeff says, leads you to the next one, one.
Yeah.
And that sacrifice might mean that the money might not be. You might be paying rent and a little more, but you're happy. Maybe you're fulfilling that's that part of yourself that needs it. In other words, those intangibles that are very important for sustaining life. But I don't mean to be glib or grim. Just there has to be an honesty about nothing's going to be magical. Nothing's going to be overnight. You're not going to fly into New York and all of a sudden someone's going to say, "Hey, you're working on Broadway, my friend." Those that work on Broadway have, you will hear the term, they have paid their dues. They have worked those crews. They have worked with people. They have exhibited a quality that has gotten them in people's phones that they will be called again. And, in a way, in those first 5 years, if you will, that's what you're trying to do, get in people's phones and get that call. And then when you are on that call, kind of like what we talked about, being foundational in whatever crew you're on, being dependable, being loyal, being dependable, things that will get you the next call. But it's hard. And I don't mean to be grim about it. But it will lead to something. And if you're passionate about it, that's one of the ingredients. And as Luke was saying about being fortunate, I think in a way we're all blessed about where things have kind of our trajectories. But you can't live someone else's trajectory or assume that any trajectory will be yours. You have to just kind of create your own path.
That is an awesome point. I love that because this question does come up to me a lot, and I'm sure it's come up to you guys by younger people from time to time. Is what would you do? And I'm like, I can't put a roadmap out for your particular career. Right. I could give you possibilities, and I can let you know about Luke and applying to the city of Raleigh and going down there, or I can give them names and things like that. But I cannot dictate to you exactly how your career is going to go, and the funny thing is I've got students. I've got one that's out on tour with Frozen right now. She didn't go to school. She just went right into the industry and just worked her butt off, and eventually she got on with that. And then I've got another one that was very much my route, which was school, and then did summer stock, and I think she's at Glimmerglass now, and things like that where you do your best. As an older person, I do my best to try to use my contacts to help my students or to help people that I think I can help. But that's about as far as I can go, because there's a lot of it you have to do on your own, you have to make it on your own.
I think you kind of hit a good point that it's not, you can't set a roadmap out with mile markers on it for people. And it's not about that. It's about having the attitude that we've talked about, the different viewpoints, the way of seeing the world, and the how you treat people. That's the important part for if you want to call it making a roadmap for yourself. It's not about saying that you have to hit these mile markers along the way, and that's being a successful person. It's about coming at this with the right attitude and the willingness to learn and the willingness to take the jobs and like you said, be loyal and
Tim, I want to thank you for this discussion. I'm very available for another one if you so choose. Luke, Jeff, it was great seeing you. Luke, it was great meeting you.
You too.
And
you, James.
Sign off.
James, thank you. Take
Excellent.
care, buddy.
A pleasure.
So I want to kind of segue because I don't want to take up too much of your time. And Luke, you've been with me for a couple of hours now. What I would like to do, if you guys are okay with it, is I think that I would, the more I think about it during the day, is do something like a part 2. And so kind of like a final question for this particular section. Jeff, I want to kind of get into the literal nuts and bolts of what this video could be. Is that some of the questions are things like, what are the craziest materials you've used? Anything weird and challenging, things like that. I looked through your PowerPoint that you sent to me earlier, and there's some things in there that I think I'm going to post that on my Google Classroom if you're okay with it. And my students will be able,
That's why I
you're
sent
okay
it
with
to
that.
them.
Okay. So they'll look through that because there are things in there where I'm like, now how'd you even do that? Like there's one, I believe it's for Wicked. There's a giant round thing on wheels and all the
Oh,
pipes.
that was for Cirque du Soleil.
Certain just like, but it was things like that. And I'm like, I don't even know how you did it. But the one that I always loved is that one of the tours that you took me on at CBS was the NFL, the set. And remember, you're like, as all monitors everywhere. If you remember
Yes.
that, I don't know how many years ago it was at this point, but so the question for both of you at this point, or Jeff in specific, is that particular set is, what is your process from the very beginning of it? So you're working in the metal shop. They come to you and they say, we want to do the NFL set. What is the very first thing that happens with you?
Well, the first thing that happens is we'd get a set of drawings to look through because we have to bid on it before we get the job.
Oh, okay.
But part of that bid process is talking to the designers and asking them what the functionality has to be and determining, they say, oh, this has to move and this has to move. And you say, okay, how does it move? Is it moving automatically, like via computer or in a motor drive? Or is it someone's just walking over and sliding it into position? Those kinds of things that have to be taken into consideration. The other thing that you have to take into consideration is the monitors. In this case, the monitors are all spec'd out ahead of time by, like any kind of electronics equipment. They're spec'd out by the designers because they know already what's going to look good on camera. They know which version of this commercial monitor has like links well with other monitors, can do all of the integration that they want to do, is best color balanced. So that sort of thing is kind of taken off the table for me. I don't have to worry about that. But what I do have to worry about is, okay, you want to have all these monitors in a wall. How do I mount them to the wall? What's the structure need to be behind there? And if it's got to appear to float out in front of the set, how do we achieve that? So those are the kinds of things you have to go through and figure out, and then you can start looking at, okay, what's the basic structure going to be for the scenery itself? How are we going to attach to it? What makes sense for, like, if it's an articulating arm or something like that, how is that going to interact with the set itself? So it's kind of a mixed bag, but you kind of have to step back and look at it from like, I think of it like if you're building a house. You start with the foundation, then you start with the walls and the framing, and then you work your way up to the roof, and then you do the inside, and you do the plumbing and electric, and all of those things. But you have to step back and start with a foundation, right? So what's the foundation in the set of the scenery? Is the set sitting on a deck, or is it sitting on the studio floor or on the stage floor? Is there something that has to happen below? So you have to make that foundation strong enough to hold everything that's going to be sitting on top of it. Then you have to go through and figure out, okay, how does this wall have to be built to be able to hold the weight that's cantilevered out in front of it? Or, there's just so many things, but you always have to go from almost work backwards and say, okay, so I know the monitor weighs 152 pounds. So what's it take to hold 152 pounds, 2 feet, 3 inches out in front of a wall? So you build that. And then, well, in your head, you're building that. Then you figure out, okay, now what does it take to hold that kind of weight that's cantilevered out there with those forces that are falling down towards the ground and swinging, in theory, swinging back to the set? So you have to make that stout enough. Then you start, these weights all start to add up. Then you have to start to think, like, you can't just put something like this on a platform that was built out of 2x4s, framed every 4 feet with 5/8 or 3/4 inch plywood. You might need to use 2x6 framing, or 5/4x6, or it might have to be a steel deck. I did one set where they had monitors in the floor, and they wanted to have a sheet of plexiglass covering all these monitors, and the span was 13 feet. I couldn't get a sheet of plexiglass that was 13 feet long. Also, they wanted it to be not supported. It just wanted to be supported on the ends. So I had to figure out, okay, so I ended up using a 2-inch piece of plexiglass, 2-inch thick, and I could only get it in 12-foot long sheets. So we shrunk the hole and made it work as best we could. But, okay, now you got the weight of that 2-inch plexiglass. It's a sheet that's basically 6 foot by 12 foot. What do you have to do to support that weight? It just kind of all goes. That's why I say you have to think backwards. You have to start at the lightest thing, work back to the biggest thing that's supporting everything. So it's kind of a mixed bag when you talk about how do you start with your process, because nothing's the same. We never do anything the same. That piece I built for Cirque du Soleil, someone else had figured that all out. I was just given the drawings, and I roll bent the pipe and made everything work. So,
interesting. So
it's
Luke, I think we talked about this in our session earlier, is a similar thing is, I know that when I talked with the props people, when we talked about the process, and everybody was basically on the same page, where it's you read the script and then you get your hints from the script. And I think we talked about that earlier. So as a production manager down at Raleigh Memorial, and you have NCT bringing a show in, what is your process for that? Because I know you taught in one of these sessions, maybe this one, that you taught that you actually get in touch with them like 10 months in advance or something like that, or depending on what the show is that comes in, you're going to be in touch with them months in advance. So what's the process?
So for my current job as a venue production manager, it's talking to the head carpenter or the production manager with the tours, or with the different companies that are resident companies that work there all the time, and figuring out what they need. For the tours, it's going to be, like I think I said in the last one, they have their production technical writer. We've got our technical writer. It's marrying those two. They have certain requirements that they have to hit. Most shows can cut back here or add here or move this around to make, and it can work. And that's all the problem solving that you get to do on a tour, because they have certain things that they have to get accomplished, and we have certain limitations. It can be done because we have done it at that theater. But the back wall of the stage is the back wall of the stage. Can you move it? Well, yeah, for a few $1 million. If you've got the money, you can do anything. But it's not easy. And for most shows aren't, unless you're Phantom or Wicked or Lion King, you're not talking about you making serious structural changes to a venue. That being said, it can be done. When Phantom came through the first time, we raised the grid in that theater 6 feet, which is an enormous undertaking.
Yeah.
So, it can be done, but that's not practical for most people. So it's the bigger the production, the more rigid their needs, the further out we probably have to start having those conversations. Here's what we have. Here's what you need. Where can we each make concessions, so that we can get a show in here that lives up to the artistic vision of the original design.
Yeah.
A very good example of that is Harry Potter on Broadway.
Yeah.
They took the theater and redid the entire inside so that it looked just like the theater in London.
Right.
I mean, complete renovation. Then they also had to weld in structural I-beams up in the grid to make sure that it could hold the weight of the show. I think it was about a 2-year project, because they basically demoed the entire interior of a theater and redid it.
Wow.
And that's just for one production.
Yeah.
And that's a show that's going to sit there for the foreseeable future.
Right.
So they you know, that's a cost analysis that someone's doing somewhere to say, look, it's going to cost us X amount of money to do these renovations, but we imagine with a shelf life of this long that we can make that money back. And that was what they did for our theater when Phantom came in, or when Miss Saigon came in. That used to be the biggest thing on the road, and we had to add a lot of these elements. You know, we did $2 million renovation to the theater for Lion King. Now it sat there for 7 weeks, and we made the money back. But that, you know, someone's got to figure all that out. And that's a lot of work. You know, it's looking at what's available in the facility, and then determining what the show needs, and then what do we have to do to prepare the venue for that show to come in. Most shows, it's just minor tweaks to the tour. For some of them, though, it's a $2 million renovation. So
Crazy. It's crazy. So,
and Tim, the other part of that is in a regional theater or in like a roadhouse venue situation, they're looking at those renovations as a future investment too, because they can bring in the bigger shows then.
yeah.
But like in this situation with Harry Potter, they have to pay to put the theater back to the original condition it was in when they arrived.
oh, interesting.
That's all built into their budget, and they have that money set aside from the get-go to do a complete restoration of the building and have it and be able to walk away like they were never there.
Wow. How about that? Now that I didn't know. Now, speaking of individual theaters, now I don't know what theater Wicked is in, but wasn't that built specifically for Wicked? I mean, Wicked's the only thing that's been in that theater, right?
They've done a lot. They did a lot of renovations on that space to get Wicked
yeah,
ready.
because I've seen it there a couple times. It's a beautiful space, but it looks, a lot newer than some of the Broadway houses up there. But
Sure, I don't remember if there was anything in there before, but you know, when you go out to Vegas, all of those theaters are specifically built for those shows.
yeah,
Especially the Cirque shows. You know, they really build those from the ground. You're often talking about an empty lot that then they build from scratch so that they can get that show in there.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
And you know, a lot of the tours get around a total renovation of the theater by bringing in a super grid and by bringing in their own deck, and they have all the automation running through the deck so that they're not building into the existing structure. They're building. I think Lion King was like the deck was 6 foot off of the stage floor, and then all the automation is down inside that deck, and that keeps you from having to do more extensive renovations to the space. And then you also bring in a super grid, which is just a large truss structure that's just under your grid, and then everything can hang from that and move from that. And again, keeps you from having to do the same level of renovation to every venue you go to, and you can more automate the process of getting a show in and out, and make things repeatable.
The grid I didn't know about. I had a feeling I think about shows that have large turntables like Les Mis or anything like that. I mean, I got to imagine that you've got your existing deck, and then they just have a deck that builds above it, so all your automation happens. And that's an interesting point. I guess I just never really even thought about it like that. I want to wrap up this one, but I would like to see if you guys want to do a part 2, if you're okay with it, because I do want to talk a little bit more. I've got a boatload more questions on my computer over here about the literal nuts and bolts of things, and I kind of want to expand on Jeff. Like when you get the plans and you start, you've now talked about how you work from the things that are going to be the weight and the set or whatever, and you kind of work your way through that process. But then if you actually specifically have the plans for the for that thing for Cirque du Soleil, that big circle thing that I was looking at, what is like what's your step from there? Like the material you use, and then like the tools you use and things like that, and just kind of getting into some of those types of things. And then I'm reading a lot of this stuff that's talk things about when designing scenery, just like tricks that you use or things that you use on a regular basis, things like that. So if you guys are up for it, maybe we'll give it about a week or so, and I'll try to come up with something today and try to figure something out. And if you guys are okay with it, I'll email you and do it again. But these, for me anyway, they've been very successful. They're very informative, and I can't thank you guys enough.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I'm gonna. These are all. I've got the first two up on my Google Drive already, and then this one I'll get up there. And then if we do a part two, I think going into some of the detail of actual material and things like that. Yeah, this has been awesome. I couldn't have asked for a better scenario. So I just appreciate it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you.
Awesome, man. Well, I guess I'll be in touch with you guys over the next couple of days, and we'll try to find another time that we can do it.
Sounds good.
Jeffy,
A lot of sitting
Sounds
around
good.
right now.
I know that's me too. Jeffy, it's awesome to see you, man. I appreciate the conversation. I mean, at this point, we were going to be up there on Tuesday, but now this is all closed down. New York's all closed down, so I'll be up there in December though for that thing.
Okay.
All right, thank you guys. Thank you, Luke. I'm sure I'll see you around town. So
Absolutely.
all right, thanks, guys. Take care. Thank you.
See ya.
Okay, buddy. Bye.
Hmm.